Today, I'm going to be ranking every single weapon in Red Dead Redemption 2. 95% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you do want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. In last place, 29th place, I've got the Litchfield Repeater. I feel like this gun is just so disappointing, especially when you compare it to basically every other repeater in the game. They all feel like actually like a good gun to play with, and I feel like the Litchfield is just so disappointing. It has 16 bullets. I feel like it's way worse than the Lancaster. It's definitely worse than the Carbine, and it's way worse than the Evans Repeater, which has 10 more bullets. I just feel like overall, it's such a disappointment because the accuracy is just not that good. Like every time you shoot, I feel like it takes a little bit for the accuracy to close down and become perfect. I feel like that just really annoys me, and it's just so much worse than the other repeaters. I feel like that in that case, like the repeaters are some of the most overpowered guns in the entire game, and this one just does not feel good at all. It's always funny because you see like all the army people and all the armed guards, all of them use the Litchfield Repeater. Is there something that I just don't know? Either way, I don't like this gun at all. I have a personal vendetta against this gun, and this one to me definitely has to go into F tier. In 28th place, I've got the Lamar Revolver. I don't feel like this is actually a bad gun. I feel like there's not really any like actual bad guns in the entire game. Even the Litchfield isn't a bad gun, like it is a solid gun, but I feel like this one is just a little disappointing when it comes to revolvers, and the revolvers just in general are not that good in terms of the game. You just can't quick draw them like you would in a real like Wild West style gunfight, and I feel like this one, because it has 9 bullets and it doesn't really do like as much as some of the other revolvers do. The other ones do a little bit more damage, have a little bit more accuracy. This one just has a little bit like less shooting ability because it has more bullets, which is fine, but I just don't think it's the greatest gun, and I think it's a disappointing one out of a disappointing bunch of revolvers. So this one to me has to go into D tier. I also just didn't use this one that much, so I feel like that's why it also has to go into D tier. In 27th place, I've got the hunting knife / the machete. Basically any of the melee weapons that can't be thrown. They're solid, but there's just not much going on with them. I mean, of course the game has to have something in this realm, but there's not really much you can do with them. And while they do play like a solid story purpose, while like John and Arthur both skin animals with the hunting knife, I feel like there's not like, it's not that good of a weapon, and I feel like it's not something you like come back to using that often. So this one has to go into C tier. It's just the most mid of the mid. In 26th place, I've got the Varmint Rifle. I don't think the Varmint Rifle is bad at all because it has a very specific use in terms of like killing little critters and not hurting them, like to get a good pelt from them. But I still don't think the Varmint Rifle is all that good in that sense. Like it has a very niche use, and you know, when you use it on people, like it's not going to do as much damage. So I don't know, it has a very niche use and it's very good at that, but like it's not good at killing other animals. It's basically only good at killing birds and small mammals. So it's just only good for that, and it's not good for anything else. So I think it has to go into C tier. In 25th place, I've got the double action revolver. The double action revolver is solid for a revolver because it does have a little bit more fire rate, but it loses some of the firepower and some of the accuracy, which is why I feel like it's a little bit worse than the next one on our list. In 24th place, I've got the Cattleman Revolver. The Cattleman Revolver is like one of the coolest revolvers in all of Red Dead Redemption 1. I feel like it's a classic, like, oh, you got a revolver, you're like a Wild West duel person, but the revolver in the game is not all that great. Like you don't get the classic Wild West duels where you're just in the holster and then it's like ready, set, fire, and then you slam the guy with 6 shots like it is in the movies. Like I feel like that part is kind of boring in the game. So I think that is kind of what takes it down to something that's like a C tier, versus in like real life it's probably way cooler. But I still think the weapon is cool in game. It's just it's more like story based, and it's not that good as an actual weapon. It's just like a kind of a mid weapon that's useful enough in like mid-range scenarios and close range scenarios. I feel like it's just not as good in other scenarios. So that's why it has to go into C tier. It's just a mid weapon, and it's like perfect for a starter weapon. In 23rd place, I have the Schofield. Basically all the revolvers in a row because they're all basically the same with a little couple differences. This one's a little bit more accurate, packs a little bit more of a punch, but since they're all pretty similar, I feel like I can't really put them any higher than C tier, so the Schofield is also in C tier. In 22nd place, I've got the Volcanic Pistol. I feel like the Volcanic Pistol is actually like one of my more favorite weapons for like how good it is, because it is pretty good in those like mid-range scenarios or like short mid-range scenarios. Especially when I was on Guarma, I was rocking this thing so hard. but I just think in general, it's not that good comparatively to stuff like a repeater, which is just way better in basically every single scenario. And while it does have a lot more bullets than some of these other things, I just don't think it's that great overall. In 21st place, I got the throwing knives. I think the throwing knives are solid, but I feel like they're just so mid. Like, they are used well as a stealth item, and they do some damage, but I feel like they're never a one hit. They're always like a 2-hit. And then, I don't know, it's just a solid item that's not going to be used a lot, but it's used sometimes. So I think it has to go in the B tier because it is pretty useful at times. In 20th place, I've got the fire bottle. The fire bottle is absolutely one of the most interesting weapons in the entire game because when you use it on people, it is just so funny, like in a weird way, to hear them scream in agony. That sounds really bad coming out of my mouth, but like it is funny to just, you know, see people die to fire. I don't know. It's such a weird way, and it's so like such a bad thing to say, but like it is funny to use the weapon, especially when you see the people's faces like in a weird cutscene. Sometimes if you'll throw it and they'll go into a cutscene, it'll be all messed up, and it's funny in that way. So it is a super like cool item to use at points, but it's just such a niche scenario thing, and I feel like it doesn't work a lot of the time. So I think it has to go into B. When it does work, it's amazing. When it doesn't, it's mid. In 19th place, I got the repeating shotgun. The repeating shotgun is solid, but I feel like the accuracy is just a little bit worse than other shotguns. I feel like you don't really need the whole repeating part of it, and you do have to like do the same thing as the repeaters where you have to shoot twice basically for it to actually shoot. So I think that kind of holds it back from being that great. And while it is a solid weapon, it only goes into B tier just because I feel like it's the worst out of all the shotguns. In 18th place, I've got the double barrel shotty. I feel like the double barrel shotty is just held back because there's only 2 shots in the shotgun. I feel like it's basically just the pump shotgun, but there's 2 shots in it. So it gets way worse. And I feel like it's just the most mid shotgun, similarly to like the Carbine Repeater and the Cattleman's Revolver. It's kind of the first thing you get for the shotguns wise, and I feel like it's just like very mid in that scenario. So it also has to go into B tier. It's a solid gun, but it's nothing amazing. In 17th place, I've got the Hatchet, the Cleaver, and the Tomahawk. I feel like they can all be kind of grouped together because they're all these melee weapons that can also be thrown. They're all pretty cool in their own right, but I feel like you don't really use them that often, and it's just, I don't know, it's kind of like a better version of the throwing knife if you can use it at times as like a stealth item. So I don't know, it's a cool thing, and it is cool that you have these like cool melee animations where you can slice people open with that. But I just think in general, they're just pretty mid, and I feel like they're just better versions of the throwing knife and of the hunting knife. It's just like you kind of mix those two together and you make them a little bit better. So I think it's just better in that way, but I don't think they do enough to be anything higher than B tier. In 16th place, I've got the Carbine Repeater. I feel like the Carbine Repeater is pretty solid. It's like the first repeater you get. And I feel like while I do always have a nostalgic feeling for like the time I was using the Carbine Repeater, it's pretty shit in its own right for like compared to some of the other repeaters, especially the Lancaster. So I feel like the accuracy is pretty mid on it. The one thing it does have over the other repeaters, even though it only has 7 bullets in it, the reload time is extremely quick just because you get to reload all 7 bullets at the same time. So that definitely gives it a step up on some of the other ones, but I still think in general with the 7 barrel or 7 like ammo capability, and then also it not being all that accurate, I feel like it has to go into B tier. It is a pretty solid starter weapon, but you're not going to really use it as the game goes on. In 15th place, I have the Volcano Rifle. I think this one and the next one are very similar, and they're very situational. Like, you're not really ever going to use the Volcano Rifle in any short distance scenarios. And while I think it is a solid weapon, it goes below the next one just because it does have a 6 bullet chamber. So it's like you do have to reload after a while, versus the next one, you don't have to reload and just use all the bullets at the same time. I feel like while that might be, very useful in something that's like medium or like not long distance, something that's long distance, you're not really ever going to use this unless you're like sniping someone, and then having to reload between that feels like it kind of takes away from a little bit. So I think this one just has to go a little bit below the next one, but it's still in B tier with the next one. In 14th place, I got the rolling block rifle. I think the rolling block is just a little bit better than the Volcano just because you don't have to reload. Like when you are in those long distance situations, if you're just keep on shooting, it's not like you have to shoot a lot. So it's not like you really need like a thing to reload for. So it's like, I don't know. I think it's just a little bit better in that way. And I think that's why, even though they're still both in B tier, that's why this one gets a little bit of a nudge over the Volcano Rifle. They're still definitely very solid in their own right, but still very, very situational. In 13th place, I got the SemiAuto Shotgun. I feel like this is a solid weapon. Like, it is useful in its own scenario, and I feel like all the shotguns are good in their own right, but I just think this one's a little bit better than the repeating or the double barrel. It just doesn't really do that much extra. Like, you don't really need the auto part of it. I feel like that's kind of just what takes it down. It is still a solid shotgun in its own right, and having 5 bullets in the chamber is pretty solid, but I don't really think it does enough to differentiate itself. So I think it has to also go in the very, very top of B tier. In 12th place, I've got the Mauser pistol. The Mauser pistol is really, really cool and does have this cool stylization. And, you know, Angelo Bronte has it. And it's pretty cool to use as is, just because it's kind of like a semi-auto pistol. Like, it's pretty quick shooting, fast reload time, basically pretty good in that sense. Does have, like, it's not the greatest in terms of damage wise. I think all the semi-auto pistols are kind of the same in that way, but it is a really cool gun to have. And I just think in general, it's one of the more fun ones, especially if you're dual wielding. It feels absolutely insane to use any of these semi-auto ones dual wielding, but I think to me, it's just the worst one out of the 3 semi-automatic pistols, but it definitely has to go into A tier. In 11th place, I've got the M1899 pistol. I feel like this one is just a little bit better than the Mauser, but it's pretty much the exact same. Dual wield it, goes absolutely insane. Pretty solid on its own. I think this one does have some pretty cool stylization. I feel like the gun looks a little bit better than the Mauser. The Mauser does have a way cooler name than the M1899, but still, it's pretty solid, and I think it also has to go into A tier. Pretty similar to the Mauser though. In 10th place, I've got the semi-automatic pistol, basically the same as the Mauser and the M1899. I feel like this one's just a little bit better in terms of fire rate, damage, and all that. I feel like it's just the best in terms of stats, stat-wise, and I don't know. I feel like it also has a solid name and like a cool design in its own right. I don't know. They're all kind of the same to me, and I feel like this one's just the best stats-wise. So I think it has to go into A tier, but all these guns are pretty great, and they can basically all be interchangeable because they basically all do the exact same thing. In 9th place, I've got the sawed-off shotgun. Well, I think the sawed-off shotgun is definitely a lot worse than a lot of these other shotguns. I think there's one key advantage to it, and it's that you can bring it as a sidearm. So you can have your bolt-action rifle, you can have your Lancaster Repeater, you can have your semi-automatic pistol, and you can also bring the double-barrel shotgun to basically cover every single ground possible. And I feel like that's just why it edges out a lot of these other shotguns, because you can bring it as a sidearm, even though it's probably one of the worst shotguns on its own. The fact that you can bring it as a sidearm is just amazing. And you can basically bring it into any fight, even if like Rockstar doesn't allow you to bring some of these other weapons. So I think this one definitely has to go into A tier just because of that, just because of its versatility in that way. But on its own, it's not that great of a weapon. So it definitely is an A tier weapon, but it's just because of the versatility. In 8th place, it's Dynamite. Dynamite is so fun to play with. You can just throw it and it blows people up. I feel like it's just a fire bottle, but a little bit more versatile because you can put it on a bow and arrow and blow people up that way. So I feel like that's a lot more fun. And just in general, I don't know, it's just a little bit more versatile and you can use it in a lot more scenarios. And it's just like you can actually use it to, like, you know, blow like your bank robbing stuff. You can blow stuff up that way, and it's used in a lot more missions, and you can like shoot it out of the air and it explodes. There's so many other ways you can use dynamite than just like throwing it at places and expecting it to blow up. So I think that's what has to put it in A tier, just because it's so versatile as a weapon, if that's what you want to call it. Either way though, definitely an A tier weapon to me. In 7th place, I've got the Springfield Rifle. The Springfield Rifle is really solid, and I think this one and the next one in the list are probably the 2 best weapons. They're kind of interchangeable, but I feel like this one definitely has to go down because it doesn't have like any chamber. You just have like your 150 bullets, and you shoot until you run out of them in that way. So like it is solid in that way. Like you technically have an infinite thing, but you have to reload every single time. So it's kind of annoying in that sense as well. But I think these are the most versatile weapons in the entire game. Great for both mid and long range, and they do a ton of damage every single time. So I feel like in that case, they're really, really strong in that. But to me, I just like the repeaters a tiny bit more. So that's why I think I have those ones a little bit higher on my list. But I think these ones could easily be S tier, but in my opinion, they have to go into A tier. In 6th place, I've got the bolt action rifle, the complement to the Springfield rifle before. I think this one just nudges the other one out of this spot because it does have a chamber. This one's great in mid to long range. Just overall, these are both amazing guns. I just, again, personal preference, can't have them in S tier because those are all my favorite weapons. I feel like I didn't really use the bolt action or the Springfield rifle as much as I should have. So I think these ones do get to go in A tier, but I think it's kind of interchangeable with some of the S tier ones as well. So definitely an A tier weapon, not S tier for me though. In 5th place, it's the pump action shotgun. This shotgun is just absolutely amazing in my opinion. I feel like it's definitely the best shotgun. You have great accuracy from long distance, as 5 bullets in the chamber, so you can shoot a lot. And I just think in general, it does a ton of damage to people. And it shoots pretty solidly. Like, it doesn't take a long time to shoot, or that long. So like when you're in these close combat fights, you basically just have to take a little bit of time, and then the next one is a one shot to anyone you see. So I don't know, I feel like it might lose some of the like reloading time and shot, like the amount of times in between shot, but it does so much damage. It has 5 in the chamber, and I feel like that's what really takes to the next level. So I think this one has to be the best shotgun in my opinion. Just having the pump action and it doing so much damage and having 5 in the chamber just puts it above all the other ones, even when, you know, it might not have the best like shooting time, whatnot. It doesn't matter. It's the best shotgun because it has great accuracy, 5 in the chamber, and does so much damage. I've repeated myself so many times, but it's just an amazing shotgun, and it definitely has to be S tier for me because there had to be a shotgun in S tier because shotguns are so overpowered in some scenarios. So this one is the S tier shotgun, and the pump action is just amazing. In 4th place, it's of course the Lasso. The Lasso is one of the best like gimmick weapons, if that's what you want to call it, with the fire bottle, with the dynamite, which is like basically anything that's just gonna be super funny to use but like not that useful on its own. I feel like the Lasso is the best out of them because you can just do all these things without actually murdering the person. Like, you're actually just nice to them, you just tie them up, and you know they can live the rest of their lives on just being lassoed. It's just so funny when you like pull someone towards you and you're just like swinging that lasso around trying to catch someone. I don't know, it's just such a funny thing to see, and other people don't see it as like violent technically. And technically, if you want to finish the game without like killing anyone, you can just use the lasso every time because you can technically like get out of the thing if you do hog tie them. So I don't know, it's just such a funny weapon to use, like if you even want to call it a weapon. And I don't know, I just love it so much. So it definitely has to go into S tier. There's just so many funny scenarios that can come out of using the lasso. In 3rd place, I've got the Evans Repeater. I really like the Evans Repeater. To me, it's not my favorite repeater in the entire game, but I just think the repeaters are my favorite like type of weapon. They're great for mid and long range, and just overall are like a really solid weapon that can be used in almost any scenario. And this one has 26 bullets, like as a super large like ammo cage. And while maybe the accuracy isn't the best out of all the repeaters, it's just a great weapon in general, and I think it can basically be used by anyone. Every single person should be liking it. So while it's not my favorite repeater in the game, the next one is. It still is a great repeater and definitely has to go into S tier because it's just an amazing weapon. In 2nd place, we have my absolute most favorite gun in the entire game, the Lancaster Repeater. I don't know if it's actually necessarily better in terms of stats than the Evans Repeater or than any other repeater in the game, but to me, I think it has probably the best accuracy out of any of the repeaters. And even though it only has 14 bullets in the cartridge or the chamber, there's also a lot of other good things about it. Like, it does have the best accuracy, does do a lot of damage, but I think the reload time is pretty slow, but you know, that doesn't really matter. Again, this one kills in mid to long range. Just overall is just a great gun in general. I don't know, I just love this one so much. And I feel like also the fact that you do get it pretty early in the game. I'm not sure if you actually get the Evans Repeater in the game. I feel like just gives it so much more of a maybe nostalgic tinge to me, where I just think of it more fondly because I used it throughout the entire game, and it is one of the best guns in the entire game either way. So I think that also just puts it a little bit higher for me. So I think this one just is my favorite because I've used it so often, and that's why it has to go into S tier. And there was really only one thing that could have beaten out the Lancaster Repeater for me, and it's the bow. And the bow necessarily might not be my favorite weapon in the entire game, but just the amount of versatility it gets because you can use it as a stealth weapon. I love that time when you and Charles go and raid the army camp and do all that, and it's very useful in those scenarios. I just think a lot of scenarios where you just want to take down people very quietly, great in those scenarios. Also, you can make poison arrows, you can make dynamite arrows. There's so many different types of arrows that you can use with the bow, and I just feel like those are all great. And it's used, you know, similarly to the Varmint Rifle. If you use a bow, you can get really good pelts. I feel like it's just so versatile in so many different scenarios, and it can also be the super bombastic big thing, also being the super quiet thing. So there's just so many different scenarios where it can be used. I feel like that's what has to put the bow in the first place, even if it's not necessarily my favorite weapon to use in like every single scenario. It's just so versatile, and it can be used for so many different things that to me, it's the only weapon that could go in the first place, and it definitely has to go into S tier. Thank you guys for making this far in the video. Of course, this is my opinion, so if you would change anything, put it down in the comments, and I will be coming out with probably a video every single week, so look out for those, and subscribe if you do want to see some more. There should be videos popping up right now if you do want to check them out.